It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and we're starting to do things a little bit different here in the Cultural Hall. Being completely candid, we do these episodes of articles of news where we talk a lot about various articles, and we don't get the opportunity to go in depth as well as we'd like in a lot of these cases. And so for this particular episode, we're going into just one specific issue. We have talked about it a bunch in what we call the Temple Ticker. So if you want to find those old episodes of the Cultural Hall, that's where we talk specifically about the temples of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but we talk about all the temples everywhere. This episode will be specifically about, as I remember it being called, the Heber Valley Temple, and our guest is Dustin Grabau. Thanks for being here, Dustin.
Thanks for having me.
Now, am I right? Heber Valley, is that what it was named?
Yeah, that's, to my knowledge, Heber Valley Temple is what we're working with.
And to the point that you are comfortable, tell people I've given them your first and last name so people can look it up. The credentials of why I'm talking to you and not somebody else.
So my name's Dustin Grabau. You heard that part, but I'm the county manager for Wasatch County. So I'm an appointed official. I'm the appointed executive of the county. The planning staff works for me, and we've been intimately involved in this project for a little over a year now. My background is I have an undergraduate and a master's of public administration. I worked for Provo City for 6 years prior to coming to Wasatch County. I've been the county manager here for about 2.5 years now.
Okay, so we should hate you, is what I'm hearing.
I am the chief unelected bureaucrat, so that's my role.
Okay. So tell people, if they are just coming to this particular episode and saying, "Oh, this is it. Okay, I'm here." What was the issue with the Heber Valley Temple? General conference, it happens, President Nelson, hey, temple in one of 20 places or 12 places, I can't remember which session it was, but Heber Valley is one of them. And then where did it all go askew?
Yeah, so I don't know if askew is the way I'd frame it, but from that time, so I think that was in the fall of 2021 is when it was fall of 2020 was when it was announced. And then in 2021, no, I'm getting this all
now
wrong.
You're making sure the dates
I'm getting this all wrong. Yeah, I'm getting the dates wrong. So it was 2021 was when it was announced. 22 is when they announced the location. I found out about the location just a couple days before it was publicly announced.
How do they do that? How does the church do that? Like, hey, we own this land, and there are probably going to be some people talking about it, and here's a press release? Or is it like, we're having a meeting, and you and the mayor and all this, we're going to do this?
Yeah, so I think it probably varies based on the jurisdictions and things like that. One of our county council members had been reached out to by a representative of the church, and then wanted to meet with me since I'm over the development process at the county. And so we had a phone call on that Friday, and then a follow-up phone call on the following Monday when the official announcement was made. Mm-hmm. And so I think they had purchased the property from a private landowner. And I know that they had been in discussions with some other landowners at some other potential sites, but they selected this one. This one happened to be within the county's jurisdiction. So it's actually outside of Heber City. That's why they came to me as the county manager.
Okay. And you're like, okay, great. I like it. I like a temple. Sure. Why not? You have to sort of be impartial so long as things are zoned accordingly. As I understand it, and this is things that I've learned as we've talked about these various controversies in these cities and townships, is that if it's legal, you can't just be like, no, thanks, go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really appreciate that. And that's something that I think some of the people who raised concerns didn't appreciate, is that as land use authorities like the county, we set the rules that people have to follow. But when they come in and say, hey, this is how we follow the rules, we don't get to say, oh, well, you followed the rules, but we don't want you to do it anyways, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That instead we have to just make sure that if they follow the rules, they have a right to use those land use rules. And really, we're just verifying that they are complying to those standards. That was part of the discussion with this project, because it's unique for our county. We're a pretty rural community. There's not a building quite this high, I think, in the Heber Valley. There are some big buildings in other places, but given the unique attributes of it, that's why we kind of have gone through a pretty relatively long process, relative to some projects that we've made sure we've gone through due diligence, gone through the proper approvals, and got to where we are today.
So when you say the size of the project, give people an idea of I guess, like what's the largest building pre what is going to be constructed, and then, you know, in comparison, what are we looking?
Yeah, so there are some big hotels kind of up towards the Park City area of the county. Park City's not in Wasatch County, but there are some big hotels adjacent to Park City that are pretty big, and there are big kind of shorter buildings around. You know, we have a large event center, we have large recreation center, and some other public venues like Zermatt Resort and Homestead and things like that. But this building is kind of all in one big mass, you know. So it's 210 feet tall, it's 88,000 square feet, and the building that we were in last night when we had a council meeting was about 30,000 square feet. You know, so that's we have a senior center and a library in that 30,000 square foot. Just to give you a little sense.
And met with controversy, which, you know, this isn't the only one, but this and probably as of this recording in late 2023, this and the Cody, Wyoming temple, certainly the ones that have taken the highlight of not here, not in my place, not in this, you know, with the only most recent one, maybe the Tooele Valley temple and that subsequent moving of that temple. What's the big deal? Why can't Heber just get on board?
You know, I think it's very common whenever there is like a big project of any kind that neighbors get concerned about those projects, you know. Back and someone at the meeting last night pointed out all of the different times that there had been public uproar over some type of change. For temples in particular, there's a lot of concern around, you know, what's it going to do to traffic? What's it going to do to property values? Does it, and I think in this case it was, does it match the character of the rural community? You know, a lot of people, they consider Heber the backcountry, right? They come to get away from the Wasatch Front, and they're here for the rural open space. And, you know, we have dark skies, and, you know, it's a beautiful valley. And to some of them, that means a temple impedes on what they expected to be able to get out of their experience here.
Well, and to some people, but there also actually is a definition of like what a dark sky is as a classification and what it isn't. Are you competent to be able to kind of define what that is?
Yeah, so there is a group called the International Dark Sky Alliance. What they do is they set voluntary standards for communities to be able to adopt to try and do best practices when it comes to protecting the night sky. And the idea is that like other forms of pollution, light can be considered pollution in that it affects your ability to enjoy the night sky. It has impacts on wildlife and other things like that. And so all of these standards are set to try and minimize the amount of light that is put out by buildings so that you can enjoy astronomy, you know, that you don't interfere with birds and other wildlife. And so Wasatch County, through this process, actually made changes to our dark sky code, trying to, I think, be a little bit more progressive in how we had handled them compared to where we started.
Which is difficult, and why people push against it is because different than maybe other types of pollution. I don't know. I guess I hadn't thought through that statement, but like once you allow a light, what are you turning the lights off? Are you know, this very much that argument of the nose in the camel's nose in the tent really does feel like, well, listen, if the light is polluting the sky at this point, we're not going to get a dark sky back.
Well, I think
open it up too much.
So through this process, so back in 2021, Heber City adopted new dark sky standards, and Wasatch County for 20 years has had a dark sky regulation that restricted the direction of light. We said you had to point light downwards, but that was the only restriction we had. Modern restrictions have things about like how bright it can be, how often you can, or what the hours of operation of those lights are, what color the light is even. Those were all things that we didn't really consider, and ones that we were talking about when Heber City made their change. And then when the church came through and said, hey, we'd like to request a change to your code, and that's when we conducted our own analysis. We hired our own consultant, and dark sky pollution is actually one of the forms of pollution that's easily reversible, right? You can
Hmm.
turn a light off. It's hard to go up and capture pollution, and say like, oh, here it is, and now I've turned it off. So that is possible with dark sky regulations. What the debate at the time, so this is early 2023, we had engaged this consultant. We're trying to find out what are the right standards for our community. And there are some that have very strict standards, some that have no standards at all. And that's actually probably most common to have no dark sky standards. So while the county engaged this consultant, we kind of picked what I would call some kind of middle of the road approach, in that we adopted a lot of much better standards than what we had before. We didn't adopt the most conservative standards. And, our consultant would tell you that. And I think that was some of the concern that some of the constituents had. They felt like we should have gone further. We should have had more restrictive dark sky standards. But the county council decided they wanted to strike a balance of having better standards, but not the most restrictive.
And then, and so as far as the board goes, and maybe this is a preemptive part of this conversation, but presumably because a certain percentage of the state of Utah are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, statistically, one would go, well, then a certain percentage of that board certainly is as well. They're probably voting party lines. We make covenants that say you're going to not stop the work, so of course you're going to vote a particular way. All of those sort of jabs thrown across the way. Like how can people trust that it's not, just going with what the church would be? I think that's the hardest thing, because the people that aren't members of the church likely have had interactions, positive and negative, with the church, and could have even been themselves a member at one time, since left the church, and just feel like, well, of course they're going to do this. They wouldn't actually look at this in a analytical way, or think about how they could preserve my community. But the church says, you do this or I'm taking away your this. Like it you can at least understand where the suspicion comes from. How do people trust it?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a credible concern. It's one that we have heard multiple times throughout this process, and one that I was cognizant of from that very first Friday when I got this call. So I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I was very aware that because of that, the bar was raised. This isn't just any project. It's a project that has to be above scrutiny, because I'm going to get that accusation that I'm biased, and I'm going to somehow put my thumb on the scale and make sure that this goes through, regardless of what the public thinks, or regardless of elected officials think. And that is not the reality. And I have said time and time again, myself, my staff, our elected officials, at no point has anyone been pressured or challenged or threatened to make sure that, oh, you approve this, or we're going to pull your tempo recommend, or we're going to withdraw membership benefits, or other things like that. To the contrary, we have tried to be as transparent as possible to try and get people engaged. We do as much as we can in public meetings where it's appropriate. A lot of this work is technical. It's typically done just by administrative staff, not done through public meetings. And but we publish the results of those efforts. So I have staff and board members that are members, and staff and board members that are not members. And I think all of them feel very comfortable that we have done our due diligence in this process. I mean, it's been over a year. We have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to make sure that we're following that process. I was asked on Tuesday whether my covenants represented a conflict of interest in this project.
In a public meeting? Tell me about that.
No, so this was a news interview.
Okay.
And so a news reporter asked me live on the radio, does this represent a conflict of interest? And I told her that I have never felt pressured to compromise my professional ethics in this project. And honestly, the most important thing for me, whether I was a member or not, is to make sure that this process was handled objectively. And like I said, the bar is raised. I knew that we would have these kinds of conflicts, but there's really no need. I'm not the decision maker in this process. We do a technical job, and it's very objective for you to be able to say, did we check X, Y, or Z? Mm-hmm. And I can say with confidence, we have done our homework. We had a 5-hour meeting last night,
Ooh.
three of which were presentations about all of the technical details and aspects of this project, all of the consultants that we've brought on board, all of the discussions that we've had, all of the concerns that have been raised and how we've tried to address those things. And I can say with confidence, from a technical standpoint, we have dotted all of our I's, crossed all of our T's, and I have no reservation saying, even if you thought I was biased, point to something I did wrong.
Mhm.
And I think that would be an impossible task.
Well, and I
Uh,
think why it's so laborious as far as some of this goes is that you are also educating an enraged public who has no idea how this goes, but they just feel. Point to me where I did this. Well, I don't know, but I feel like you're doing this thing, and so long as my feelings drive this thing, and so in an abundance, you have to be like, here is what the law says. Here is what how we observed the law. Here is, and on and on and on. And that's why it probably, not only time wise, but in these particular meetings, why it has to be so long is it's bringing everyone so they know even what the heck you're talking about.
yeah, and we kind of touched on that before, that a lot of people, they don't typically engage in uh, land use decisions like this until very late in the process, and they don't appreciate that a lot of the decisions have already been made. Every community, especially in Utah, but in other places, they have what's here called a general plan. It's a high-level policy document. That's where like the overarching priorities are set. And then you adopt land use code, which are implementing those things, and then you have projects at the very end. And really those first two steps are kind of the most important ones, but also the least glamorous. People don't like to think about things in abstract. They think about, oh, I do want a Walmart there. I don't want a Walmart there. I do want a temple or don't want a temple. And by that time, we've already done our homework. We've already set out those priorities. And then we're just evaluating, does this match those priorities? And the answer is yes, in this case.
Hmm. As we're sort of talking about Heber and its sort of ruralness, and how this will be a significant project for the valley. People that are unfamiliar, it is a valley, mountains on all the sides, and 100,000 people maybe in the valley now with all the
No,
people.
not well. We're a third of that. So
okay. Oh, okay. I thought it was. Maybe that's projected what I heard. Anyway,
yeah.
so not large, but I compare it to St. George of yesteryear in that you have at the very city center of St. George a ginormous temple, now restored, renovated, and in grand opening, open house, and all that stuff right now. But it is very much the pinnacle of that community, and people look to that. And if you are on team I Love Temples and the church, there is not a more gorgeous edifice in that valley, a significance of the covenants that it is, because you are centered around that. And so to those people who feel so passionate about that, they're like, could there be a greater thing? Answer, no. But then you go to adding that, after the fact in a place like Heber Valley, those people also, but also to say, you know what, hey, it's 125. Well, let me think about this. 150 years later than that temple. Times are different, and the code said, and this is so we're doing this.
Yeah. And we got literally hundreds, if not thousands, of comments about this project. It's been a year. We had one council member say that he's read over 2,000 emails about this. There's overwhelming positive support. There is a pretty hefty number of those comments that are people who had raised concerns. I think a lot of those concerns ended up being about those technical aspects that we were able to address from a technical perspective. But ultimately, the agreement kind of, or the disagreement, I should say, balanced on whether or not this is a legislative priority. And there's an overwhelming, I think, sense of this is in the public's best interest. This is in for the general benefit of the community. Some people feel like, well, because I'm in the community and it's not in my personal benefit, that means that you should not approve it, right? Yeah. That there's kind of this sense of like, we should have a veto over this decision. When in reality, the council represents the whole community. We have 5 districts and 2 at-large council members, and they're trying to strike a balance of what does the community as a whole consider a benefit to themselves. And I know the council members and non-members alike take that role really seriously of, is this in the best interest? Is this for the general welfare? And they voted unanimously last night to say, yes, this was in the general welfare of the community. And like I said, that was members and non-members alike.
So as we are talking about this, the day after the board has said, yep, we're doing it, on board, let's go. I know that means that the suit that was issued by Dark Skies, that's essentially dead and null. Are there other roadblocks that are foreseen that could be coming to this, or is this just like, guys, we all did our best and we came to a collective, and now let's do this?
Yeah, I think one of the council members said it well last night before he voted. He said that he would like to move this project forward so we can begin the healing process, right? Because there are people who are concerned and will continue to be concerned about it. There are things that if people wanted to, they probably could try, like a referendum might be an option. That's where they would gather enough signatures and that could to potentially make a decision like this subject to a popular vote. People would be able to vote yes or no at a ballot box. I think there's an outside chance of that, less likely than not. What's more likely is we might be legally challenged. We did get letters from 2 different law firms asserting that they thought our approval process would be legally challenged by their firms. So that's a possibility. What that would have to do, though, in order to actually affect the project, is they would have to bring a suit to a court and have a judge issue an injunction saying, hey, you can't act on this because it's under legal review. It's a relatively high standard to meet, and one that, while it's possible, again, I think is maybe a little bit unlikely.
So from the original suggestion, church says, hey, here's our plans, to where we're at today, board meeting has happened and we're going forward. What changed, or did anything change?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of work to do. So when they first reached out to our staff, there are some complexities. Some of the things that we had to work out, or what does access to the site look like? These are all like the technical, not, like I said, not very glamorous details, but
sure.
They had to do a traffic study and they found that they needed to install a roundabout. So that was part of the project at the end of the day. The original request, so like I said, we revised our lighting code. The church actually submitted a code amendment to do that. That's where we changed what our code says. And what they submitted is not what we adopted. We hired our own consultant and adopted very different standards that were much dimmer than what was originally requested. And that's why last night the church shared through their architects that this temple has an innovative lighting approach. And I would frame it as, this is going to be probably the most, one of the most, if not the most dark sky compliant temples in all of North America. And so their innovative lighting approach is that they're highlighting architectural features instead of doing more blanket lighting. And so I'm really proud that this community, our lighting standards are such that we're going to have, I think, an unprecedented temple that will still be beautiful, but matches our community's values. So those are some of the things that have changed. A lot of the other stuff is just technical, of where do the trails go and what does the infrastructure look like and how do you handle sewer and water and wastewater and those kinds of things. Stormwater.
Is there going to be any education piece added to teach Utah drivers how to do roundabouts? Because I feel like there should be some money in a budget to go, this is how you do this, and you're doing it wrong.
There is a lot of concern from some people about the benefits of roundabouts. The reality is they're much safer from a traffic standpoint. So I hope that as they become more common, people can appreciate it's just kind of a better way to handle those types of intersections.
Sure, but Dustin, as a Utah driver, you know what I'm talking about. How whenever you engage a roundabout, you go, no, what are you, what, why? What?
I know more than most. I served a mission in England, and so I learned to drive. Now I was going the other way around about, but yeah, I like roundabouts, probably because of that. But no, you're right. They can be challenges for some people.
See, it wouldn't be a biased or it wouldn't be an unbiased thing. You brought your English bias to the roundabout by the temple. I see.
That's right. Yeah, I put my thumb on that scale, right? Yeah.
So, is it in the back of my mind, or am I mixing temple discrepancies? Was there a height adjustment with the building in the Heber Valley Temple?
So there wasn't a change. There were requests for changes, and a lot of that focused around the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, lighting standards.
Mhm.
So that was something that's been kind of a saga of how bright and what lighting is required, because this is in a flight approach path. When someone's coming to land at the airport here in Heber,
Mhm.
they will have to fly right over the temple. And so what the standards the FAA would require was a big question mark when this project first started out. At one point, we thought that there was going to have to be lighting far in excess of our county code that would be required on this temple because of that. But what we have approved as of last night is a single red beacon that will be on the west spire, which is the taller of the two.
Mhm.
And so that single red beacon is constant light, and there's no extra light necessary to do it. And I think we all feel really good that we ended up there instead of, somewhere that maybe didn't match quite as well the aesthetics that we're going for.
I don't believe I've said this publicly before, but I was, the change in the temples for the church, in that we don't put Moroni's on temples anymore. I was disappointed. Heber Valley not going to have a Moroni temple, and several
true.
hundred others, right? But I was upset because once I heard that we were going to have that aviation light, I really liked the idea of having the red be like a mute in the trumpet of Moroni.
Just on
And
the end of
yeah,
it.
just on the end, and it's like, I wonder what that sounds like. We're playing jazz over at the Heber Valley Temple. It's just going to be on the top of a spire. So that's interesting to note that that's part of it as well. Any other kind of things that either were things that were let go of, things that were pushed, that there will still just be bucket loads of people that are upset about, or are we hopefully at that point where it's just, let's push this thing through and get to the dedication?
Yeah, so there were some concerns about on the east side of the property. There's kind of an outbuilding for utility services and other things like that, which is immediately adjacent to the backs of some of the residences.
Mm.
And so there were some concessions made around the types of walls that they would put up. The height of the building was lowered. They made some adjustments, and we actually required them to do an audio study, where they measured what the decibel levels of the equipment would be at certain points, and found that at the property line, where the boundary between the church's property and these residents, that it's going to be about the same as like a normal home sound that a normal home would generate.
Mm. I like the idea of service vehicles having like a cave that kind of rises from the ground there.
That would be pretty cool.
Apparently it's not going to happen, but that was sort of my wish. And 5-hour meeting, aside from being exhausted, is the feeling in the community like, or
yeah, I'm sure if you're not a fan of the project, I doubt it was very relieving. But I know from a staff perspective, the uncertainty is over, right? That we're proceeding forward now, and it's a purely administrative process. They'll start to work with our staff on pulling permits to be able to begin the construction. There is a few procedural steps before that. I've got to sign some documents and other things like that we got to work out. But it's all go from here. And I think there's a big sigh of relief of, we have had multiple very large public meetings. This isn't the only 5-hour meeting we've had on this. We had
I know
2 on the lighting and 2 on this one. And so I think we're glad to have those things behind us. I think it's regrettable that it became as divisive as it did. And I don't blame people for having concerns about, they thought, they were going to have houses in this spot, and they're upset that it's not houses. But those types of concerns are something that communities like ours deal with all the time. When a store moves in, or a apartment building goes in, people raise those concerns, and they're valid. They have a right to share those concerns. But at the end of the day, the county council has to make a decision of whether those concerns outweigh the legal rights and the other standards and the priorities of the community.
I've been thinking of a way that I could ask this question that you could actually answer it. So let's see if I am able to ask it this way. Were there concerns by residents that you did not see coming, based in non-lighting or other kind of issues, that when you heard that you were like, that is a unique concern, that you could share one or two of those?
There was one that sticks out in my mind that someone had emailed and raised concerns that we had not sufficiently required checks for endangered species on this site. And it was previously a farm field. It was active agricultural land, and I was not expecting that to try to be used as a method for us to deny the project. I think those types of concerns do get raised, and I can think of a state park right now that is dealing with a endangered bird species issue. So it does happen, it just doesn't happen in places like this typically. So
and valid, right? We don't want to downplay, but it is definitely one of those things where it's like, what? And I'll say that you didn't say that. I said, there you go. What? As we sort of wrap this thing out, I would be curious to ask you if you have followed any of the Cody, Wyoming, because you're like, hey, yeah, we're right there along with you, Cody. I guess I'll start there. Have you been following that scenario and saga as well?
Yeah, I have, even just because I've been asked my opinion on those things because of the parallels with our process. Now, I will say, I think there are not very many parallels. They're kind of pretty different circumstances and different parts of the process and different issues that were raised. So.
And then do you foresee, and this is your opinion and not your professional whatever, do you see change on behalf of the church within Cody? I know that it at one point they said that, hey, it's settled and moving, and then now there's other lawsuits. Do you think that those that are protesting that temple there have different legs to stand on than the people that were protesting the things there in Heber Valley?
This is something I was hoping we were going to get into, is there are federal laws that are intended to protect religious institutions who are seeking land use approvals.
Mm-hmm.
And that federal law is called the RLUPA, Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And what it does is it federally protects religious institutions from building buildings in a way that ensures that they can practice their faith. That was a factor of consideration for us only to the extent that the method that we used was intended to confirm and verify that both the church as an applicant and the county as a land use authority agreed on all of the standards of, well, what should the lighting level be? And we both agree this is what the lighting level should be. That was the development agreement that we went through to approve it. So that's one of the ways in which it's not similar to the Cody, Wyoming area, in that we worked out in advance what those sticking points would be, and mutually agreed on what the standards would be that the county council was considering last night. But I would say in Cody, Wyoming, there is probably a difference in that a lot of people might argue, well, you don't need a steeple at all, right? Like that's not a that's an aesthetic feature.
It's not an argument. I mean, that's been a thing to me, that absence of all the laws and stuff like that, where I just at some point I just want to pause and be like, Jesus doesn't care if it's lit, guys. Like if we can take this as a moment and just be like, if we really want to gain perspective on this, I'm pretty sure he's not like, is that 50 feet or 100 feet? Or is that 5,000 lumens or 2,000 lumens? Like, we're a little bit missing the point. I know that's oversimplified.
Yeah, but I think you're right to an extent that, like, I don't know that there is some kind of objective height limit of, like, if it's not this tall, it doesn't qualify as a temple, right?
Right.
But at the same time, the purpose of the architectural design of a temple is religious in nature, right? And that's when you get into shaky ground of, some of the criticisms that were levied against the Heber Valley Temple were, it's too big, right? 88,000 square feet. Why aren't you building a 30,000 square foot temple like you are over here? That is the exact type of argument that I think that RLUPA law was passed to preempt, because that has a direct impact on the capacity of any religious facility and their ability to operate, right? So can you imagine if instead this wasn't an LDS temple, but was instead a Jewish synagogue or a Muslim mosque, and we said, that's too big. we don't think you should make it that big. I think that would be us imposing or limiting the ability of that faith to exercise their religion within the confines of that structure. So to the same degree, the size, the shape, and they have explicitly argued that even the lighting itself has religious significance. And so while you could try to get into a lawsuit and say, what is the lumen count that is religious or not religious? We did not want to end up in a lawsuit over this. We rather would decide to mutually agree. And the church conceded, and they agreed to lower that level, and we didn't risk any lawsuit. And I think this is exemplary of a good land use process in that we reached an agreement. Legislative body felt like we had reached a good level. The applicant, even though they lowered that level, we reached a good compromise. And I think it's one that matches the community.
So pretty proud of it. It sounds like as you walk walk away from the 5-hour meeting of this and say, no, we're not there yet, but
it's
one step closer.
It's a 3-year build, right? So we're looking at 2026 is when the project will be done for my staff. What I am most proud of is having worked with really amazing staff members. You know, I have a planning director who has lost a lot of sleep over the last year, and he has worked tirelessly because I know he feels the same pressure as I do of making sure that we are objective, we are doing our jobs, and we have been very thorough through this process. So it's a privilege really to work with people who are so competent. And that's part of what I think happened last night is we had 3 hours of presentations, 2.5, something like that. But our staff did such a good job laying out the issues, trying to address those concerns that the county council was very comfortable proceeding when others might not have been. They might have felt, hey, that we got to work out some more of these details, but we had done our homework. We had tried to explain in enough detail that anyone could understand why some of the concerns they were raising were not issues.
Right. And I love that part of it too, where you can go, well, I don't like it, but I understand. I get where we're at. It is now, you know, these things have been presented to me in a way that I'm allowed to not like it. I'm allowed to look at it and go, that we should have never done that. But that I can respect that it's like, yeah, but I mean, there's lots of things.
Sometimes the best I can aim for is, people not being too mad about something.
Sure. So. And I think about another building project up there in Wasatch County that looks like it's going to have 20,000 rooms in it. And I go, what are we doing here? What is this? And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. And to everyone who isn't in the state of Utah or even knows what I'm talking about, goes, I'll send a picture. I look forward to your invitation to the groundbreaking. I don't know if you need my physical address or my just email. You can send me that. I'll be your +1 for that. I look forward to
that. You know, you should just send that to the prophet and see. He'll get you one.
I'll CC him, but I just want to make sure that you have it as well because I don't think he has time to invite me and we all know it'll probably be Elder Uchtdorf that will do the groundbreaking because he has a second home up there. And then, so is there anything? All the rest is just sort of paperwork and groundbreakings and those things. There's not anything that, as you see it, monumental as you look into the rest of this project.
No, and I think that's another difference with Cody, Wyoming, is after they had granted an approval, there was an attempt to withhold the building permit, and it's not something I think we'll deal with here. So
yeah. And I love the idea of, and I haven't seen the picture. So if anyone listening to this lives in the Cody, Wyoming area, I would love it. contact@theculturalhall.com is also an email you can send that invitation to the groundbreaking to, Dustin. But there are parts and pieces of the Cody, Wyoming temple on property because that's one of the I call them Lego temples that the church is building where it's prefabbed and they kind of put it together on site. There are those pieces just waiting there. And I just sort of think of it like the arch that the 2002 Olympics had. It's going to start to be a boneyard of, well, we wanted to put this together. Here are all the pieces. Let's put them on a truck and get them out of here. I appreciate your time. If people want to learn more, either about the planning stuff or this whole process, is there somewhere that sort of documented the steps as it's gone along the way people could follow?
Yeah, we actually record and publish all of our public meetings. So our website is wasatch.utah.gov.
Mhm.
And you can go there, look at all of those meetings in the past. You can look at the meeting last night. It should be published about now today. But there are also a number of news articles and radio interviews and other things like that that are out there. So
Well, I'm grateful that you and the other an individual can have a good night's rest. I hope you guys, with the money that the lobbyists from the church paid you to be able to make this, I'm just teasing. I'm totally joking. But even with all of the T's and I's and all the things, there will still be those people that are like, yeah, I don't know how they did it, and maybe it's not on the record, but they were able to get away with it. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you're like, man, we got to talk about this before our time is done?
no, I really appreciate the time.
Of course, Dustin, we hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you are not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.